Welcome to Humanity, the epicenter of ideas surrounding transformative change that will revolutionize the way our world interacts with technology.
What is the best strategy for accelerating healthcare innovation? Our guest today will describe how he leverages relationships and organizations to drive healthcare innovation. I'm Kevin Castle, and welcome to the Humanity Podcast, where we inform and empower the public through powerful dialogue with IT visionaries. Joining me today is Mark Fisher-Colbury, President and CEO of Stratios. Mark has a diverse background of driving change in a variety of industries and spaces, and he's a relationship-driven innovator who values collaboration and devotes his time to both business and community in such organizations as the T1D Venture Fund. Mark, I just want to welcome you to the Humanity Podcast.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the things that I thought would be good is if you could share a little bit about your background, right? We've talked about all the different things that you're involved with, but I think it'd be good just before we get started into kind of our core themes and topics to just learn a little bit more about you, and then we can launch into that.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to have a diverse background in devices, diagnostics, therapeutics, and novel areas of medicine and healthcare. And most recently, I've been involved in laboratory tools, bringing to market an incredibly novel tool for handling liquids, which really allow precision and accuracy for scientists for the very first time, down to the level of a billionth of a liter in terms of the accuracy and precision that can be provided. Along with that, have enabled automation platforms to support those activities. Fortunately, that activity has continued to progress at Stratios, where we're bringing to the world via the cloud a fleet of automation platforms that allow faster drug discovery and advances in life sciences more broadly.
Interesting. So, I mean, this is definitely a hot topic for everybody who's been alive during 2021 and had to go through all the changes and chaos that we managed to try to navigate through last year. So how are you guys specifically doing this with the technology platform to leverage the expedited approach to rapid development around therapies and drugs and vaccines and things like that?
Yeah, that process today is such a long one of 15 years and $2.5 billion to get a drug to market. And it's exacerbated with COVID in the context a lot of people are shut out from their labs. What the Stratios platform has enabled is the ability to combine the steps of making the building blocks of chemistries that turn into therapeutics and have them co-located on a fully automated platform with the biological testing tools that will determine the best characteristics for those chemicals. So you can continue to optimize a therapy at a much faster pace for cycles that can take days instead of weeks to months to accomplish in today's methods. And so we're able to provide all this over the cloud. So you can literally work at home, design a molecule, pick from a panoply of biological tests, and get your data back. And that could be done also in the context of if somebody chooses to, they can actually program the lab directly themselves. That's how flexible the automation is, to enable other sets of experiments to be conducted. The really key thing here is the fact that this replaces a lot of today's manual workflows. A lot of what you see going on in the lab today are people standing in front of a bench, manually pipetting, transcribing protocols that inevitably, if somebody tries to pick that protocol up in a different lab in a different geography, they can't replicate the same data or the same results. So the ability to have incredibly clean data sets that are driven quickly are obviously of great import for discovery. And this replaces the 1850 artisan style of what's happening today broadly in life sciences. What's incredible is the further leverage that machine learning, data science, artificial intelligence tools can bring to those data, because those data are clean. They are in a format that's enabled for really expediting artificial intelligence analysis. And that's even the next level of benefits that are going to occur with this kind of a platform. So as you can tell, I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's very timely, right, for us to be able to have this type of automation in the healthcare space. So applaud you on that. And so one of the things that we've seen when we've rolled out technologies and looked for new ways to do automated approaches in healthcare is that there's some aspects of resistance, whether it's from a regulatory requirement perspective or just kind of a change in process from the way that things used to be done. So how have you guys dealt with those types of things that are typical in any type of innovative technology transformation effort?
That's a terrific question, because you're always having to change human behavior when you're bringing new things to the market, which has been my whole career.
Right.
And in that context, it's incumbent to really have the opportunity to share the science and share the data. And that creates a tremendous opportunity for people to more rapidly grasp the benefits of what new approaches can avail them. And so in that context, that's one where the ability to have those kind of interrelationships and interchanges with people are really important to help drive innovation through the system. Because it builds confidence, it builds trust, and it builds a context of you're, at the end of the day, working to solve a problem or a series of problems. In any one discrete event that's more transactional in nature isn't really the best way to do that going forward. So in this context, we really see the future as one where laboratories need to be reimagined as data centers. Those data centers can be thought of as very analogous to server farms, replacing internal server rooms of large IT staffs, i.e. cloud computing. And in turn, those data streams are ones that can have broader scale analytical tools applied to them to extract out even the next level of being able to see what is going to advance drug discovery, synthetic biology, and a whole slew of areas of life sciences.
That is fascinating and amazing. So the laboratory in a box metaphor, kind of compared to a server farm, are you guys having to partner with people that are on the hardware side of this or the chemical side of it to basically have your cloud software platform meet in the middle, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question. While we're primarily a software-driven technology company, we have deep experience in capabilities in automation. We also bring to the table chemists and biologists across various disciplines. And really what we're doing is a capability of both drawing upon other automation islands and solutions, along with our own automation capabilities to create a broader construct of a co-located lab for workflows that are typically in different cities and sometimes on different continents. And so that's then one where, by providing transparency with every step of the schedule of the protocols that people can literally watch on the computer, that's that human behavior aspect that helps to change some of the thoughts of, well, I'm used to kind of visually looking and seeing if something turns cloudy and look at other elements. And really what we are enabling is, by converting this all to computer code, we're enforcing a series of disciplines while providing transparency all at the same time for people to feel that they've got control over the process.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that we've seen in the last year and a half was just a heavy transformation in healthcare with technology adoption. Obviously, there's been, on the automation side, there's been the telehealth presence push. There's been a lot of innovation efforts and strategies that healthcare has adopted. So it would be interesting to hear, do you have any kind of impact stories that you've seen over the last couple of years with your product and service that you're offering to the market?
Yeah, very much so. For example, we've been running a program with DARPA for 18 months now, where the ability to have a variety of genes inserted into a bacteria then results in the ability to produce a super wide range of materials that is in fact the next industrial revolution that's occurring as we speak. That set of capabilities and sequences are very important for being able to scale up operation of those things that you want to have bacteria produce. And so DARPA has been working with us and in conjunction through our platform, because it enables global collaboration, 23 other institutions to be able to take hypotheses for improvement of this gene insertion activity and run it on our platform, get the data back, feed those data directly back into their predictive models, use that artificial intelligence tool of prediction to generate a new set of hypotheses. And so we're very excited about that because it has a direct result in this context of being able to create new biosensors that can be used in a wide variety of fields. And so we're very keen on continuing that kind of propagation. On the drug discovery side, we're in a situation where we're working with a consortium that includes the Department of Energy, where they're using artificial intelligence tools to design on a computer a therapy for COVID. And that therapy is going to be tested on our test platform to see if it might, what's the best solution set for the proper chemistry to come up with that therapy. But this is important in the context of not just for COVID, but also for COVID future variants and getting ready for the next pandemic. This is because of our automation platform can be run with just a few people. What that means is that in a future pandemic, people can get their research done again without having to be concerned about being shut out of labs or their key lab personnel suffering from the pandemic and not being able to advance new therapies. So Department of Energy and others are looking longer term as well for how to deal with the next pandemic.
Makes perfect sense. And I have to ask two questions, which I'm not sure if you're at liberty to answer, but I got to ask. So in the DARPA example, what types of gene insertions are you guys working on? Or are you at liberty to speak?
Yeah, no. It's these are common gene insertion techniques in the context of there's a variety of modalities that are employed in the process of doing that, and the key is that essentially instead of having yeast bacteria make beer, you can have the yeast bacteria make other things, and so in that world of engineered biology, you can literally have bacteria make the equivalent of silk. It can make the equivalent of polymers. And so much so, those kind of polymers that Airbus has contracted with synthetic biology companies to develop new materials for future airplanes. Wow. To make them more lightweight. So they're also using synthetic biology to generate end chemicals that normally would take super toxic chemicals as intermediates to drive the production of those chemicals. And so what that means is there's a whole slew of toxic waste that can be gotten rid of by going directly to the end result. And then, finally on engineering, biology, there's a company right now that's already had successful field testing of rather than having a huge carbon footprint of trying to create fertilizers by sucking nitrogen out of the air to create the fertilizers and then shipping them and then having to distribute over fields and having tremendous runoff, you can create the equivalent of what exists today in the natural world, bacteria that does that for you. So that's already had a big improvement in yield gains on crops, as well as completely obviates any kind of pollution runoff and reduces carbon footprint. So these are all exciting elements that an automated platform such as Stratios can be behind the scenes, allowing these companies to accelerate their work in addition to the companies that want to accelerate drug discovery.
Fascinating. Okay. Wow. Wow. That's phenomenal. And it's amazing to see that type of impact, both from a diagnostic perspective, but also biological engineering for just chemical production and all types of other clean environment tactics. So that's fascinating. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and this is something that we talked about prior, was innovation through relationship building, right? This is a concept that when we spoke prior, you had mentioned this, and I wanted just to peel that back and explore, because obviously as it looks, when we look at your career and the things that you've accomplished and things that you're doing at Stratios, you're definitely on that front of innovation, and you've been able to build organizations and drive it from a CEO seat, and see where you can take things in the market. So tell me about this concept of relationship building to innovate.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of need in the course of introducing new concepts and new technologies of trust. In order to do that, one has to take the perspective of not being transactional in a business context. And so as a consequence, I've always taken a lot of time to develop relationships and to create an environment where the team around me, that's their focus. And that's when we're looking at long-term interaction and relationship. And, that comes, obviously from the perspective of trying to advance the opportunities of the company. But along with that, there is a tremendous result that occurs, and that is 1 + 1 = 3 in that conversation. There are countless examples that I can think of where the ability to be open in our communications about our activities and what we're thinking and what we understand to be important for people has a great reflection back from folks of saying, hey, if you could do this, then we could do that, and then you could do this. And there's a whole other series of dot connecting that can occur that can never occur if you don't build that relationship. And so that's the kind of thing that is extremely important to effectively to be able to draw upon an ecosystem for allowing innovation to make further progress to begin with, and then also to accelerate that progress.
So when you're approaching, well, there's a couple of thoughts that wanted to bounce past you, right? One is many of the listeners on this podcast are technology leaders within the walls of an enterprise, right? So there's the same parallel that I see from you as a CEO who runs a technology company looking to make external relationships to drive innovation within the walls of those organizations, right? But there's also a parallel internal for the technology leader that's steering that ship within the walls of their organization, right? And also there's partner options as well. So within that construct, how would you approach building meaningful relationships versus transactional relationships, and how have you done that, and what's been successful when you've approached that?
Yeah, what it is a conscious allocation of time, and that's one where I can think of an example where I was interacting with a fairly senior person at a particular pharma company while I was at LabSite, and that's one where one could have made the argument that, hey, you as CEO are wasting your time flying to the United Kingdom on average once a quarter for the development of this relationship, because you are not generating near-term sales off of that. So you really are remiss, because that is something that is a failure on your part overall. People could easily point to that and say, hey, that's a misallocation of your precious time. The reality is, as a direct consequence of having those interactions, we were able to kick off 2 incredibly novel path-breaking utilization of our technology with acoustic dispensing at LabSite that led to tremendous scientific advances. And none of that would have occurred if we hadn't I've been having dinner in Manchester, England, and broaching a couple topics over a dinner conversation that just would not have happened. So that's the kind of thing that is just one example of the kinds of activities that having that direct contact can create the environment to be able to get to that 1 + 1 = 3 set of solutions that benefits everybody. So that kind of stuff is just fun because you can really make big leaps and big advances in the course of doing that kind of activity.
And how much time, I mean, as leaders driving organizations, right? How much time do you typically allocate to that type of activity, and what would be your recommendation for those that are listening?
Yeah, that's a great question, because if you spend all your time doing that, you can't drive the business forward. Right. And so, the reality is, both on kind of the relationship side and on kind of the portfolio of where to go look at things, because typically with new technologies, you've got the opportunity to look through a list of 100 items. As a business, you have to stay focused. And what that means then within this context, however, you need to budget and allocate part of your time and part of your product portfolio towards relationships, and on the product side towards more speculative areas for exploration. And the way that translates then is, an 80-20 rule, where you've got to stay focused on 80% of the business and those kinds of things, because there's a lot to building and growing a company, and I've done that through every stage. And that's a situation where you do need to budget time for this relationship work and for exploration of new ideas and new concepts that you have no idea where it's going to go. And by the way, if you were to pay a lot of money for a market research person to tell you what it might look like, it's so new they can't even tell you. And I can remember specific project where we did charter somebody to do a market research survey on that opportunity, and they came back. They said there's zero chance of any opportunity, and that this is ends up being a multi-billion-dollar market opportunity. So so anyway, that's the kind of thing that can happen around that. So 80-20 rule, I think, is a good way to frame that activity overall.
Okay. I appreciate that, Mark. Yeah. And I guess the one question I'd have is, I keep thinking this is kind of like your R&D time as well. I think you draw a parallel to that, right? What's your feedback loop to measure on the right track, in the right direction, talking to the right groups, speaking to the right people, getting the right ideas going? What's your personal measure to see where you're tracking there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for me, what I look for is progress. Are we moving the goalposts, or down, or rather, are we driving down the field towards the goalposts? And yeah, so the question then is, are we making progress, towards that goal? And do that, frankly, placing some bets without great information ahead of time, that's a good use of your time. And so in the course of doing that, you can start to get a sense for, are things progressing, or are we advancing? And what happens is a very important thing here, and a lot of people forget about this. By acting, you learn. By learning, you are in a new plane of existence that allows you to learn something new that sitting in your office or sitting in your cubicle, you can never get there ahead of time, ever in a million years. And a lot of people miss that point. They think they can do some pre-analysis that will, connect those dots for them. And that is very much often completely not the case when it comes to innovation.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Well, I appreciate your thoughts there. One of the other areas that we were fascinated to explore is your involvement with the T1D Venture Fund.
Yeah, I'm really excited about trying to help find a cure for type 1 diabetes. I've been a long-term volunteer for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, so much so that I ended up chairman of the board of that organization, which is the largest funder of type 1 diabetes research globally. And that's one where that autoimmune disease is something that required continued thoughts about accelerate. And the organization had fortunately been able to devote a fair amount of capital to doing tremendous work with a list of academics all around the world, and made some amazing discoveries. Those discoveries would get published in some great papers, and then unfortunately might end up sitting on a shelf because there was no logical, realistic way to propagate that discovery into a commercial environment to get it out of the market. And so JDRF continued to shift its capabilities and add to getting to the well-known valley of death of new ideas and new companies moving these projects forward by setting up the T1D Venture Fund. And this has been wildly successful, and it's in a context of JDRF did not intend at all for that fund to be in a situation where its primary objective was to generate returns the way most VC funds do. The primary objective was to get great ideas to a position where larger companies could step in and commercialize those tremendous academic capabilities that came out advancing type 1 diabetes. And by way of direct example, there's a company, Provention Bio, that's about to get a FDA approval related to forestalling the advent of type 1 diabetes onto the market. That's one where the JDRF T1D Venture Fund was able to do two things: get them their first initial seed funding and help redirect their initial portfolio towards type 1 diabetes. But that seal of approval and that initial funding allowed them to raise $26 million very quickly from other private capital that otherwise would not have put money in. Subsequently, they were able to file and get an IPO, which enabled them to prosecute these clinical studies that are now getting this essentially a therapeutic to the market. So that's a direct example of looking at the landscape, seeing what the needs are for accelerating innovation, filling the gap with a financing vehicle of the T1D Venture Fund, and then allowing companies to shine and prosper. And in the meantime, there's been a whole slew of companies that have followed the same model with the T1D Venture Funds. And fortunately, all those gains that the funds are getting can be reinvested back into the next set of companies. So so it's an evergreen kind of capability. So this fund has now been emulated by a whole host of other people. Nobody has ever achieved the kinds of successes that JDRF has been able to accomplish with this kind of a structure.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, we mentioned, or you and I discussed prior, I've consulted with a couple of dozen different laboratory and biotech companies where the science is evolved to a place to where there's an impact to a patient population or a particular diagnostic process, but there's a chasm that needs to be crossed from the commercial side, right? So seeing an organization like T1D be able to create that bridge that crosses both on the seed and then also to help shepherd them along the way for each of those different bridge raises along the path. That's fascinating. Are you seeing this more in healthcare where there's tied to a particular diagnostic, if you will, or patient situation where there's funds there, or are you seeing this, is it around an acute situation, or are there any broad funds around this just in general impact?
Yeah, great question. More broadly, other disease groups took immediate notice to the T1D Venture Fund and got direct contact in order to emulate the model. So you see now a propagation of this in a variety of disease groups, and this is all further accelerating, science. And so the other kind of byproduct of these initial wins with T1D is not only does it then create an environment where other investors now do see an upside opportunity in investment in this area where they didn't before.
Yeah.
But it also spills over into broad scale autoimmunity projects where other people were, say, shying away from certain elements. So this all kind of feeds on itself, has a bigger impact and a more resonating impact, even beyond kind of the initial wins. But yeah, the model's been replicated by other disease groups and will continue to be so.
Yeah, it's interesting because you could think, a traditional approach would be to create a nonprofit vehicle for that capital outlay or research or impact. Now you're basically creating this fund to have the commercial entities to be able to care forward and use the traditional approaches to raise to get some momentum out in the market as well. So it seems like a fascinating approach to solve really key problems where we do have that commercial chasm that's hard to cross in healthcare.
That's right. And from our perspective, the T1D Venture Fund, we don't care about the risk profile about it. Are we going to generate a return or not? Because that's not our objective. Our objective is to get, a capability to everyone out there for advancing improvements in type 1 diabetes. Okay.
All right. Well, interesting. Well, I think it would be good for us in the show notes for us to give a call out to people that would like to participate in some capacity and kind of in some of these organizations that you're mentioning here as well. I think that would be good for the users.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mark, I that's all the time that we have for today. I appreciate you giving us your background, sharing your stories of impact, telling us the wins that you've been able to make, both in the nonprofit world on the fund side, but also on the commercial side with your organization. So I appreciate your time today. I also want to recognize our listeners. Thank you for tuning into Humanity Podcast. I hope you've gained some valuable knowledge today, and please subscribe if you haven't already, and send us any feedback or ideas you have and would like to see in for future shows. I'm your host, Kevin Castle, and you've been listening to Humanity. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.